All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating Supreme Court case. And look, if you run a business, or honestly, even if you just pay taxes, this is a story you absolutely need to hear. It's all about a pawn shop, a huge tax bill, and what happens when you just can't find the proof.
Just look at that number for a second. Over 4.5 million pesos. Now, this isn't some lottery jackpot. This is the final tax bill that became the center of a legal fight that went all the way to the top, the Supreme Court. So you have to ask, how did a simple dispute over some receipts blow up into such a massive amount? So let's get into the facts of the case. On one side, we have the petitioner, Tambunting Pawnshop Incorporated, and on the other, the respondent, who is the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. The story really kicks off back in the year 2000. The BIR takes a look at Tambunting's 1997 taxes and finds some major discrepancies. The pawnshop, of course, protested. But when the commissioner didn't act on that protest within the legal 180-day period, Tambunting took the next step and brought its case to the Court of Tax Appeals, which, as you can guess, set the stage for a very long fight.
So, what was this whole fight really about? Well, it wasn't about the pawnshop hiding income or anything like that. No, the whole dispute came down to the expenses the pawnshop claimed to lower that income. We're talking about tax deductions. And this, right here, is where the battle lines were drawn. So, just a quick refresher, what exactly is a tax deduction? Well, simply put, it's any legitimate business expense that the law lets you subtract from your total earnings. The idea is simple. The lower your taxable income, the less tax you have to pay. But, and this is a huge but, there's a catch. You have to be able to prove every single peso that you claim. And this is exactly where Tambunting's problems really started. The BIR went through their books and disallowed millions in deductions. I mean, look at these numbers. Almost 4.8 million pesos in claimed losses from auctions, over 1.8 million each for things like security and rent, and nearly $1 million for fire and theft losses. And you see the common thread here? The BIR flagged all of them as unsupported. Okay, this brings us to what lawyers call the ratio decidendi, which is really just the core reasoning behind why a court decides what it decides. For Tambunting, it all boiled down to one thing: evidence. So let's really break down what the pawn shop showed the court and why, in the end, it just wasn't enough. So first up, those big losses on auction sales. Tambunting came forward with their internal records, their rematado book for foreclosed items and the subasta book for the actual auctions. The problem? The pawnshop themselves admitted these records were incomplete. The books didn't show the true capital or the final sale prices, which made it literally impossible for the court to figure out what the actual loss was. All right, what about the everyday stuff, like rent and security? For these, Tambunting presented cash vouchers and certifications from the people they paid. But the court immediately pointed to the law, which is crystal clear. You need official receipts or invoices. See, a cash voucher is just an internal piece of paper. An official receipt is external proof. It shows a real transaction happened and was recorded by another registered business. Without that, the court said the proof had very little value. And then there was the almost 1 million peso loss claimed from a fire. The pawnshop had certifications from the fire and police departments, plus its own accounting entries. But they completely missed the single most important piece of evidence required by revenue regulations. They needed to file a sworn declaration of loss with the BIR within 45 days of the fire. They didn't, and just like that, the claim was disallowed. So what's the big lesson here? What's the major takeaway? You see, the court's decision wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was all based on a really important, long-standing legal doctrine in tax law. And this is the principle that really sealed Tambunting's fate. Right here is a powerful quote from the court's decision, and it has a really critical legal phrase in it. Deductions are construed in strictissimi juris against the taxpayer. Okay, sounds complicated, but let's break down what that actually means. Strictissimi juris. It's Latin for of the strictest law. And in the world of taxes, it means there is absolutely no wiggle room. The rules for claiming a deduction are interpreted in the most narrow, strict way you can imagine. And if there's any doubt at all, any ambiguity, the decision always goes in favor of the government. And right there, that's the absolute heart of the matter. This is the core doctrine in action. The responsibility, the burden of proof, is completely 100% on you, the taxpayer. You know, it's not the BIR's job to prove your expenses aren't real. It is your job to prove that they are, And you have to do it with clear, convincing, and legally required evidence. So, how does this all work in the real world? Well, the law lays out 4 pretty simple requirements for any expense to be deductible. Now, Tambunting actually met the first 3. The expenses were ordinary and necessary, they were paid during the tax year, and they were part of their business. But they fell down on that 4th and most critical step, supporting everything with the required pertinent papers.
So after all those years of legal battles, the case finally landed at the Supreme Court, the last stop. So what was the final word?
No surprise here. The Supreme Court affirmed the earlier decisions from the lower courts. The verdict was clear. Tambunting Pawnshop simply did not sufficiently prove its deductions. The case was never about whether the expenses actually happened. It was about whether they were proven according to the very strict letter of the law.
And so this is the final disposition of the case. Tambunting was ordered to pay that deficiency income tax of over 4.5 million pesos, and on top of that, a 20% delinquency interest that had been ticking up since way back in the year 2000. It's a very, very expensive lesson in the importance of keeping your paperwork straight.
And that's what brings this case from decades ago right into our world today. It makes every single one of us, especially business owners, ask a very simple but very important question. If the tax authorities showed up tomorrow, could your records really stand up to that kind of review? It's a multi-million peso question that is definitely worth asking yourself.